Hello there, everyone, and welcome back to Russia in Context. This is the second half of news for the week of February 1st through the 8th, but I decided to try something a little different this time around. See, over the weekend, Moscow decorated some parts of the center for the Chinese New Year, which was 7th of February. So I had to walk around and I filmed it, all for you, so you could see for yourselves. I also figured it might be a nice change of pace from sitting in this room with me all the time while I discuss the news, and I don't have too many visuals to share with these stories, so you can fully enjoy the views of New Arbat, Tverskoy Boulevard, Tverskaya Street, and Kamerygersky Pereulok. So let me get out of the way here, and let's get into the news. Let's actually start with talking about the Chinese New Year. As you can see, this last weekend it was celebrated in Moscow and I believe in other large cities across Russia. Now, this is the first time the city has ever officially decorated for the event, and in the current geopolitical context, a lot of people are not pleased, oddly enough, seeing it as kissing the ring of Russia's new Chinese overlords. Hell, the government said that there would be no fireworks at New Year's, the country's largest celebration, because it would be inappropriate to celebrate while our boys were on the front lines, and also that money could be better used elsewhere. Yet, here we are, buying Chinese lanterns and inflatable whatnots, which evidently is appropriate. Now, the authorities say that Chinese cities are also going to celebrate Russian holidays this year as part of a cultural year or program or something like that. But even if so, the news of Chinese banks returning Russian payments and refusing to do transactions this last week with Russian companies to avoid secondary sanctions felt to many as a stab in the back. Russians, despite what the official line of Kremlin may be, they don't inherently trust the Chinese any more than Americans do, and many certainly don't like the feeling that they're becoming wholly dependent upon Beijing, just a few steps away from transforming into a vassal state. In the words of Oprichnik Zdey, another chapter from the story That's Different, as told by the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in response to the knife in the back from our Chinese friends. It would be a nail in the Kremlin's coffin to lose China, the country's last substantial partner in the eyes of the international community. So everything must be tolerated while grinding our diplomatic teeth. Yandex, Russia's one-time potential Google competitor, was split and sold off this week for 475 billion rubles, nearly half of which will be received in yuan. The money went to Yandex NV, the European half of the company, that will be changing its name and cutting all ties with the Russian half, which will remain simply Yandex. The European half must also refrain from engaging in any types of services that are analogous to those in Russian Yandex. News of the sale caused the company's stock to drop over 9% on the Moscow Stock Exchange, although I think it has recovered. Honestly, though, this is sad news. I know some people will say that Yandex is still great and much better than Google here in Russia, but that's really only true for certain apps, and the potential Yandex held has been destroyed, and I doubt that it will be able to earn that all back, even in a future Russia. With so many sanctions, just as it is now, Yandex could have been real competition for Google with an integrated business model that made it a mix of Google, Amazon, Netflix, Spotify, Uber, and I personally doubt now, though, the effectiveness of the new management, and it's just kind of sad to see such potential lost. The price of bananas and cloves is likely going to be increasing in the near future because Ecuador decided to classify old Russian and Ukrainian military machinery in the country in Ecuador as being not fit for use, thereby allowing legally for them to give it over to the United States, which then said that they would give it to Ukraine in exchange for new U.S. military equipment worth, I believe, $200 million. Russia was not happy about this and voiced its disapproval of the plan, and then, lo and behold, a few days after it was announced, the Russian agency charged with monitoring agricultural products discovered that part of Ecuadorian imports for bananas and all of cloves will be banned. due to some nasty little critter that just happened to be discovered in shipments at really the most convenient of moments. Honestly, though, this is Russia's most common form of punishment with poorer foreign countries, food bans. And it was even used against the United States and Europe after the first wave of sanctions against Russia in 2014. Now, will this hurt the Ecuadorian economy? Not at all. Banana exports to Russia make up only 2.5% of the country's exports total, and China has already said that they would buy what Russia isn't now. On the other hand, over 90% of Russia's bananas come from Ecuador, meaning that the price for bananas, which already increased by nearly 50% in the last year, is probably going to grow even higher, regardless of plans for India to take over that import niche. And as one Telegram channel pointed out, how long until India does something to make it seem unfriendly, and then India is punished, in kind? Why does the Russian government see fit to punish foreign governments in ways that ultimately just make the daily life of its citizens more difficult and less pleasant? Another oil processing plant was struck by a Ukrainian drone, this time in the city of Volgograd. This appears to be the new tactic of the Ukrainian armed forces, and it seems to be working in some respects. The Russian Ministry of Energy reported that gasoline exports were down 37% and diesel exports 23% due to unplanned repairs. Now, these attacks seem to happen at least once a week, and Russian air defense systems just aren't capable of totally preventing such attacks, which are almost certainly going to continue and perhaps become more frequent. Some experts are proposing Russia move its oil processing facilities farther into the country to the Ural Mountains and beyond into Siberia, even to the Far East. This would greatly benefit those regions, and it would make fuel more affordable for them there. And it's a surprise, honestly, that there aren't more of these processing plants there already, but I don't think it's a realistic plan for the short term. And I also have questions as to how such a move would affect fuel prices in the European part of the country, which largely takes priority over everywhere else. Russians are maybe going to be able to skip leg days at the gym in the coming years, as over half of the elevators in apartment buildings across the whole of Russia will reach the end of their technical lifespans by this time next year. Including elevators in hospitals and other social centers, this pushes the total number from 45,000 elevators to nearly 100,000, which is basically 20% of the total number of elevators in Russia. And in the fact that most of this equipment is foreign-made and that prices on elevators have increased by 150% over the last year or so, and the price tag for replacing everything is 300 billion rubles, got problems here. According to the National Elevator Union, even if all the money for housing repairs across this whole country were applied to replacing lifts, it would only be enough for 60% of them, and then residents would be out of money needed for roof, facade, and utilities repairs. So it looks like the collapse at the beginning of January with utilities might just have been a taste of what's to come. We've evidently reached the point in Russia's current political metamorphosis where politicians, namely Andrei Lugovoi, are calling for special police units to raid bookstores and make sure books written by foreign agents are removed from the shelves. The policing of books in such a fashion surely couldn't have any historical parallels, could it? Rainbows are basically now illegal in Russia. On January 29th in Nizhny Novgorod, a 24-year-old woman was placed under a 5-day administrative arrest for wearing rainbow earrings. Her friend was wearing a pink cardigan and a pin of the Ukrainian flag on it, which is also not outlawed in Russia, despite what many might think. And two people came up to them, filming, and demanded that they take off their extremist symbols. Later, they just ripped the pin off the man's clothing when he refused. Now, the video was put online, and after that, the authorities came for her. Her lawyer attempted to explain that the LGBT flag has 6 shades and that her earrings were rainbow-colored frogs with 7 colors, although State Deputy Alexander Hinstein claims that it was actually 6. But honestly, it ultimately doesn't matter because it's literally the rainbow. Also in L'Etoile, a popular cosmetics store, they have begun coloring over the plastic wrapping on a hand cream, which features a unicorn with rainbow-colored hair, making sure that, this feature is hidden from view while still in the packaging. So at this rate, God help the science teachers who have to teach about the visible light spectrum. They're in for a rough time. Another socially resonant story has to do with charges leveled at a pediatrician. The 67-year-old Dr. Nadezhda Buyanova was accused by Anastasia Akinshina, a mother and recently made widow, of spreading fakes about the army. According to the mother, upon learning that the 7-year-old boy missed his father, who was killed in Ukraine, pediatrician Buyanova supposedly chuckled and then stated that the deceased was a valid target for the Ukrainian armed forces. Buyanova denies Akinshina's story, making it a situation of one person's word against the others. It still resulted in Buyanova losing her job and having her house turned upside down by the police. Now, obviously, if Buyanova did react to the trauma of the young boy in such a fashion, she should certainly be punished, war or no war, as that is entirely inappropriate behavior towards a grieving child. The problem is, as I stated before, it's Akinshina's word against Buyanova's. Now, this situation should have probably just been reviewed before action taken against the doctor. Instead, she lost her job and is being prosecuted by the state. The Russian establishment loves to talk about cancel culture, how it's such a problem in the West, and it's so unfair, but this is just one clear example among many that it exists here just as much, though here it tends to be initiated or at least supported by the government, as this case was immediately flagged for prosecution by Alexander Bastrykin, the head of Russia's investigative committee, something akin to the FBI. Anyway, somehow Buyanova was not arrested, as the court responsible for reviewing the situation said the evidence was not convincing enough. This likely won't be the end of the story, however, as one state deputy has already requested an investigation into the legality of the criminal case opened against Buyanova, and this entire story has brought back a plan to install audio recording devices in all medical offices across Moscow, ostensibly to work up a standard for the correct style of doctor-patient interactions, though it's more likely it would have been used and could be used to punish doctors who suggest abortions to women, and could possibly be used to even sniff out those doctors who help young men avoid military service. I actually planned to report on this a week or two ago, but a hullabaloo was made here in Moscow about this idea by citizens and doctors alike, and then the Moscow government sort of shelved the project, and I thought everything was finished for the time being. Now I'd guess that they'll revive the plan, and they're going to probably frame it as being beneficial for everyone so that if such cases occur in the future, which, depending on how this one plays out, might be guaranteed, that in the future it won't be one person's word against the others. We'll just have to see. We're going to end this video talking about Tucker Carlson. Now, the fact that he had an interview with Putin is not really news at this point. Everyone knows about it, and everyone has already made a video about it, and in a few days, I'll release a video into how it was received here in Russia, as well as my own takes on the whole thing. However, the reason that we need to talk about Tucker is because when he appeared in Moscow, the press couldn't stop obsessing over him, and this obsession highlighted a few things about modern Russia and the powers that be here, which I think are important to understand. Now, I'm going to be quoting Russian journalists and Telegram channels, which I feel did the best job of contextualizing the Tucker mania that took hold here and why it happened, as well as highlighting a few contradictions to the whole situation, which is what we'll start with. I'll put the names of the journalists or the Telegram channels after the quotes. Angelina Artyuk, a film critic, was forced to resign from the Petersburg State Institute of Film and Television because of a trip to the United States to work on a Fulbright grant. Meanwhile, the Kremlin-funded workshop of new media invited Tucker Carlson, a man whose own show many times aired fakes and conspiracy theories, to teach Russian propaganda broadcasters. Art critics aren't allowed to study in America, yet propagandists being taught by Americans is allowed? This type of bipolar disorder is everywhere. For example, if a citizen transferred 1,000 rubles to Ukraine, it's high treason. Yet if Rosneft delivers fuel for the Ukrainian armed forces, or Putin announces that the Russian government pays Kyiv billions for the transit of gas, everything is fine. It's just business. A country conquered by duplicity. In general, it's touching. In a country where laws have been passed to send people to jail for fakes, naturally, pardon the phrase, people are pissing themselves over the visit of an American journalist who was fired for spreading not even false information under the guise of it being correct, but for out-and-out defamation. Now, the author of this, Vitaly Abyetin, then goes on to remind the reader that Carlson was run out of Fox News and that the company had to pay $767 million for his lies, the largest defamation payout in history. Anti-Americanism in Russia, I beg to differ. Carlson arrived and stole away everyone's thunder, and Moscow is happy as a pig in mud, sweetly smiling and fawning. It's utter idolatry to the West. There aren't any actual anti-European or anti-American trends, in fact. There are fixations and aggression, ready at a moment's notice to switch to their polar opposites, the thrill of a peasant in front of visiting royalty. The true reason for all the rapt attention toward Tucker Carlson in the Russian news space is not obsequiousness and sycophancy, but the completely unnatural and alien turn to the global South happening currently in Russia. No Russia-Africa summits, no rituals of the global majority, no close brotherly relations with China and Iran are capable of hiding one simple truth, that Russia is a European country and that Russian society, by and large, is absolutely European. We're part of European civilization, just like Americans. There are millions of threads uniting Russia to Europe, and no political disagreements or wars can cut those threads. On the television, they can show Chinese New Year and the joyous faces of African artists as much as they want, but the people will abandon all of that at the first opportunity and will follow Tucker Carlson instead. Likewise, tours to sunny Isfahan will in a moment be changed to the familiar Paris with the warming of international relations and the return of Schengen visas. You can never be rid of the context and so-called global outlook, and therefore, I have not the slightest doubt that the future of Russia is namely in the European world, and the present as well, for that matter. And with that, we finally have come to the end of this Russian Week in Review. A lot of news this last week. I'm going to assume that this next week is going to be a little bit more quiet, as the last few days since the release of Tucker's interview have literally just been people poring over it and analyzing it, and everybody's just like in this stupor after it. So, which is fine, because I will, like I said, I mentioned earlier, I will have a video looking into the Tucker Putin interview as well, coming out here in just a few days after this one is released as well. Anyway, as always, leave a like if you enjoyed this, share this with your friends. If there's any questions or any comments, please write below. I will do my best to explain or give you an answer. I know sometimes I go maybe a little bit fast, just there's a lot of information. I'm trying to get through it. So if some things are not clear, please just let me know, and I will attempt to, go into further detail in the comments. Or as I've mentioned in the past, if it's a question that seems like it requires a greater deal of explanation, then I will maybe even go into it in a future video. For now, though, this has been Russia in Context. Thanks for watching.